So it's not for kids.
Kenny, I'm fucking mad.
Why are you mad?
Like, literally no good reason. It's kind of funny. I took a test today, a sequel test for anyone who cares.
A sequel to what?
Oh, it was actually a squeakquel test. It was testing my knowledge of the Alvin and the Chipmunks second film.
Did you pass it?
Yeah, so I passed, except I got all but one question correct. And I'm very miffed about missing this 100%. It's a weird place to be, because like I shouldn't complain because I passed a test and it's over. It's out.
Yeah, does it matter? Are they grading you on how many you get right?
No, it doesn't matter at all. It just irritates me.
It's a personal.
Me. Yeah, exactly. Like
I feel that. I've been there too.
This is like,
especially if you knew the answer and it's like a technicality or something, that's like the most annoying.
No, exactly. 100%. It was one of those fucking questions that's like almost a trick question where it's just like, well, it could be this or that. And it doesn't really matter. Yeah, exactly. Because it didn't like lay it out all out. There wasn't enough context to truly be able to determine in my brain.
Did you ever do the thing as a kid where you like hold someone's arm and then you like hover with your finger and you're like, am I touching you? And then they're like, no. And you're like, you idiot, I'm holding your arm with my other hand.
That's so funny. I haven't done that, but I will do that to my kids now.
You don't have a lot of control as a child, I feel like. And so to like in that split moment to just like completely crush another human being with your wit.
Yeah.
It's like, it's euphoric to a certain extent.
It's your origin story, you could say.
I don't think I ever did it to anyone. I had it done to me. I'm just talking about it in like a conceptual sense.
Mm-hmm. There was something one of my kids did recently that was like that, but it was one of those where it was like, no matter what you did, they had a way to troll you.
Yeah.
It's like the now spell it. And if you spell IT, they were like, hi.
They do the opposite.
You didn't know the word, you know? It's like, fucking come on. It's classic.
On one hand, I'm like, oh, I can't believe you just did that to me. But on the other hand, I'm like, you know what? I got to let him have this one.
You're like, I've got, $20,000 in my bank account and they don't. Oh, might as well let them have a win. Yeah.
Yeah. Come around 8 p.m. I did your dumb spelling thing. Okay. So go to bed.
Yeah. You friggin' pwned me with the spell I cup moment. Okay. So get out of here. I don't want to see you till tomorrow morning. This is killing it with like our 12-year-old audience right now. They're like,
our 12-year-olds are like, oh,
they're like
la 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 lava, chicken.
I was a parent helper for like this sports day thing at the school.
Oh, resident sports expert.
Well, I was just helping them play Hungry Hungry Hippos, apparently. Okay. But with those rolly carts that always crush your fingers. It was kind of wild. And I told the person who was running the music, I was like, you got to play Steve's Lava Chicken. And she actually seemed like she didn't know what it was, despite having a 10-year-old son. And then, like, it was so good watching all these kids, like, they're just rolling into each other, like going after these balls. And they're all singing, like, Lava Chicken at the same time.
It's like you putting like ecstasy in the fucking Kool-Aid at like a rave. Like
I just like lit a cigar and like I was like the Joker right at that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, light a cigar and just walk out of the room.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome to Shelf Stable, a podcast celebrating board games that have stood the test of time. I'm one of the hosts, Kenny Katayama.
And I'm your other host, Tom Bowers. Today's feature topic, it's an interesting one. We're talking about games with a fandom. Fandom games?
Not to be confused with Phantom Games.
Yeah, what comes first, the game or the fandom? We'll find out. But before we talk about that, let's just talk about some of the things that we've been playing recently. Kenny?
Tom, I got to play Caylus 1303 from 2019. Not to be confused with Caylus 2019 from 1303, which came out in 2005.
Can you imagine, like, in the 1300s, they came out with a board game that was thinking, like, 800 years into the future?
Yeah, in the future, we will have worker placement. Caylus 1303, like the original Caylus, is a very very true to worker placement game. So it doesn't have any deck building. It doesn't have any like things on top. We talked about Stone Age pretty recently. Caylus is a similar brand. When the original Caylus came out, it was like the start of worker placement. Like Bus had come out and one of the key games had come out, and those are considered like the progenitors of worker placement. Caylus was like the next big thing. And then after that was Agricola. The big conceit with Caylus, there's two. One is you build out the future spots for workers to go to, and you get a little benefit whenever somebody goes to a spot you built. You see this in games like Waterdeep, for example, a lot of worker placement games after. The other big conceit is that there's this little horsey, the provost, and some of the spots and abilities would allow you to move the provost. If the provost moves past any of the spots where you have workers on them, the provost is just like, no, we're done for the day. And those spots don't trigger, even if you already put the worker on there. So as you can imagine, it gets pretty cutthroat where somebody took the really juicy spot that's near the provost and you are upset. So then you go to the spot that lets you move the provost and then you push the provost in front of that spot so that they don't get the trigger. Played this a few times now, and I had played the original Caylus. What I've found is that the game's meanness is entirely dependent on the group. If you have even just one person that's willing to be like, I do not care, I am going to hurt you, then it's like a super knife in a phone booth kind of game. If everybody's like, let's all work together, I'll help you, you help me, then it's like a more contemporary, a bunch of points Euro. So it's kind of interesting in that sense where the rules don't change, but all of a sudden you have all these different ways of playing it, which I thought was pretty cool. I personally prefer when it's a little bit meaner because it creates more of that negotiation, and you have to think about a lot of things in terms of like how to play versus thinking a lot of ways of how to score. And for me, like how to play is more interesting than how to score. But that's a personal thing. I do like that it allows for those different ways of play, because sometimes I think games fall apart if you're too nice when it's supposed to be mean and vice versa. I don't know if you would like this, Tom. I feel like you would.
It seems like it. It's a round game with a boring, tried and true mechanic. I feel like those tend to perform surprisingly well with me.
So Caylus 1303, I'd say the only major differences with the original Caylus is they streamlined a lot of things. There's a lot of fewer like steps in the round upkeep. They all happen at once and some are consolidated. Another really nice thing is there used to be two resources, like workers and coins, and you had to spend a certain number of coins when you place a worker. Now they just made it workers. They also changed, there's like a favors system that is pretty different in 1303, which I really like because it adds an extra level of cutthroatness. Basically, you have these ID abilities that you start with, but you don't keep them necessarily. And so if you just happen to have the strongest ID at the table, it's not a big deal. It's not unbalanced because you can literally go to a spot that just lets you steal somebody else's ID, and now you have two IDs. I feel like there should be more games that do this, and I was like trying to think of one that does it, and I couldn't. If you do think of another game where you can literally steal people's like unique asymmetric powers, let me know. And then also, like, I think there's really something there. I think if people aren't doing this, like, they should do it more. A nice way to balance unique powers is to just make it so that you can either shut them down or take them from each other. And it adds to the interactivity too. So I really like that aspect.
Didn't Cosmic Frog do that to some extent?
Yeah, Cosmic Frog did that. That's a good one. Good call out.
I got you.
But yeah, that was Caylus 1303 from 2019. Original game from 2005.
Kenny, Caylus sounds like a cool game. It sounds very Castles of Burgundy. Would you say that that's true?
A little bit, yeah.
Mostly in vibes?
In vibes, for sure, yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to take us way back. You were talking about the 1303. I'm going back to 1810. I'm talking about Texas Hold'em. And specifically Texas No Limit Hold'em. I'm talking about poker. Most of our listeners have played some version of poker. And if you've played some version of poker, you probably played Texas Hold'em. The reason I'm talking about this is because it's probably the oldest game that I've been playing the most recently for two reasons. One, our group randomly decided it would be a fun idea, and I agree, it was fun. And then on top of that, I had a bachelor party for my brother who will be getting married in this summer. Both times I played Texas Hold'em, it was like tournament style. So it was just like to try and place as high as you could without being eliminated. And both times I ended up third place. So I'm on to something, I guess, kind of. I'm consistent. I don't think I'm like particularly good at poker, but I definitely have... I'm grokking it pretty readily, and I think enjoy...
you were doing a good job, yeah.
Thank you. I really enjoy something about the dense terminology of it. It kind of reminds me of like Netrunner, how people will just be like, okay, he's rezzing the thing, and like, you know what I mean? Like where you just can call out card names ahead of time.
Yeah, it's funny. Like a good example is like the middle row. It's like the flop and then the something and then the river. And it's like referring to the same thing, but just how many cards are in it.
Oh, it goes deeper than that, right? So it's the flop, which is the first 3 cards, the turn, which is the 4th card, and then the river, like you said. But then on top of that, each of those is called a street. So you can say things like, you know, like I 3-bet on the flop, and then I was waiting to see the next street, or forcing players to buy into the next street or whatever.
Yeah, I see that.
You know, I've got aces full, or you got a boat, a set. Like it really excites me for no good reason that there's just like all these technical terms. I was having such a good time doing poker in real life. I was like, I don't want to play this online for real money because 1, I think it's illegal where we live. And then 2, that would involve money. So I was like, what can I do? And Board Game Arena has a beta Texas Hold'em. Guess what happened as soon as I finally got into a game? I'm like dealt like ace king or something, like a decent hand. And then one of the other players just shoves all in on the first go. And I'm just like, okay, I'm all in. And then the third player's like, I'm all in. And I won. And it's just like, well, that was fucking
cool. How long did you wait to play the game?
It took like 5 or 8 minutes because it was, you know, like not really that active. I mean, I should have known. I should have known because like when there's nothing real on the line, like no one really cares to suss things out, I guess, you know. I'd say even if fair. Like the only currency that BGA can have in this scenario is like ELO. So I don't know how they could fix that. It's kind of unfortunate that you can't get people to play the game. It's such a social game. It's like strictly defined by people's willingness to actually try to engage with it correctly. You know what I mean?
I see, yeah.
Even if they can't. Kind of makes me want to like get more into it, start like driving out to like reservations.
I'm pretty sure there are like popular poker apps that you can play that aren't illegal because they don't have money involved or anything.
Yeah, I'd have to wonder. Because like there's like all sorts of legal status stuff. Or I could just move to Pennsylvania where it's allowed, apparently.
Yeah.
I'm considering it. I'm just kidding.
So you've been enjoying it though.
Yeah, I like the fact that it's a probabilities game, like sort of first. It's like first you have to understand the probabilities. And then it's like once you know the probabilities, then it becomes an interactive game, like where you have to know the way people play and be able to kind of correctly determine when they're going to go big on stuff and like when they would lay stuff down and things like that. It's like you can basically take money from all your friends just by knowing the probabilities. But then like once you get to a higher level where everyone's familiar with the odds or whatever, it's much more social as I understand it. So I'm very fascinated by it at the moment. Really enjoying watching shorts and clips on YouTube.
Nice.
Anyway, that's Texas Hold'em. Thoughts?
I enjoy it when we play it. I don't like how long it is. Mm-hmm. As the words left my mouth, I'm just like, I'm such an archetype of myself, aren't I?
You can speed it up significantly just by raising the ante like every 5 minutes or something. If you don't want to actually wait for orbits around the table.
But even then, I don't know. I feel like it like loses its pace to a certain extent. It's like you kind of have to let it breathe to make it good, because otherwise you might just have like bad hands. You know, it's kind of like a trick taking game in that sense, where like sometimes you'll just have bad hands, and so it's about the probabilities over time versus the immediate hands you're getting.
Right.
I prefer Mahjong, but
what if it was a version of poker where there was just where every card in the deck was like good somehow. Like you can only be dealt insane hands, and then it's a matter. But then they become relative
to each other, right?
I know, right? Yeah,
yeah. I do like flops that have excitement built into them, like the 3 cards are synergistic.
Mm-hmm.
I like when it plays out like that. I'm less excited when everybody just has ass around the table.
I think ass around the table it's one of the more interesting moments in stuff like the gang, for example.
Oh, in the gang, yes. Yeah, for sure.
But you think in real poker, you're like,
In real poker, I'm just like, okay, now it just becomes like understanding the minutia of what other people have. Yeah. And not having that knowledge just is like, okay. Aeon's End. I played Aeon's End finally from 2016.
At last.
This is designed by Jenny Iglesias, Nick Little, and Kevin Riley. Published by Indie Boards and Cards. Aeon's End is a deck building game.
Jenny Iglesias, like the fluffy guy? I'm kidding. That's just a nice little reference for you.
Yeah, you want me to cut that one out or keep it in?
You know what? I'll let you pick.
Aeon's End is a deck building cooperative game. If you've ever played like Marvel Legendary or something like that, each player has their own deck, and you are fighting a big monster and other bad things that come out of the monster's deck. And you are buying cards that you are adding to your deck to make it stronger so you can ultimately beat the monster. If you die, then you lose. If the monster dies, you win. This is a very popular game. It scores very highly on Board Game Geek, and it also has gotten some pretty positive reviews from critics. To the point that it's created a whole universe, as well as a whole line of expansions and standalone games, including a Legacy Edition. One of the main things about this game is that you have an econ engine, and then you have a fight engine like a lot of deck building games, but the fighting is telegraphed. I think that's the best way to say. You have a certain number of slots that you can cast spells, and the spells usually do damage, but they also have other effects. And so part of the game is managing the economy of making those slots available when you don't have enough of them, or unlocking those slots permanently. So it's not just I buy a bunch of cool fighty cards and then I win. It's I have to manage the economy so that I can create the slots available, the actions available to cast the spells. And then because it's a co-op game, you also have this interesting maneuvering of like you pre-assign the slots so other players can manipulate those. Like there's certain abilities that are like create a copy of a spell that has been cast that hasn't been triggered yet and stuff like that. So you can like kind of volleyball it where you like set up an attack and then someone else plays off of it. That I liked. I like that there's actually incentive for players to collaborate because some abilities really trigger well off of others.
Kind of makes me think of the Marvel United system.
A little bit, yeah. There's a little Marvel United in there. If you've ever played like Xenoshift has a little bit of this too. Except in Xenoshift, it's like you buy a card that can go to another player's deck, so that you set them up to hit with it. The other main conceit, or I guess unique thing about this game, is that you don't shuffle your deck. So what happens is you buy cards, they go in your discard. You play cards, they go in your discard. You choose the order in which the cards you played go into your discard. And when you need to draw, you flip over your discard pile. So you sequence the cards in a certain way where you know exactly what's going to come. You can basically predetermine the hand of cards you get. The benefit to that is that you don't get screwed. Like you know exactly what you're going to get. The downside to that is it adds a ton of AP and a ton of downtime because now you're like,
yeah, keep me far away from this fucking game because like I know.
I
gotta think the exact order.
Yeah, I think you would not like this game and make it last 8 hours. You take what's generally snappy in deck building, which is like reveal my hand, do the things, buy a card, and shuffle, draw. Now it's all of a sudden like. Reveal my hand, determine which slots I'm putting cards in or if I'm opening those slots, then buy a card, then determine the order in which the cards go into my discard pile, flip. And that just adds an hour at least. I can't even imagine playing this game with 3 players. I think 2 is probably a sweet spot, or even just solo. All that to say, like, it's not the worst game I've ever played, but it was generally unpleasant. I feel like we tend to be a little polarizing on this podcast. Like we're either like this game's amazing or this game is the worst. Aeon's End is a really good example of something that's kind of just in the middle. Like, I wouldn't mind playing it again, but it really didn't do anything special for me, at least.
It's peak mid.
Yeah, the flipping is really just... It kind of leaves me like, what is it about this that people prefer over some of the other deck builders? Because I feel like Aeon's End is considered on the high end of pure deck building games. It's somewhere with Clank and with like Dominion and Ascension, like around that realm. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if it's higher rated than Dominion. I don't think it's higher rated than Clank on BGG. And I'm just like, why?
Is it not a top 100 game? I feel like I always see it somewhere.
Yeah, it's number 95. So it is in the top 100.
Wow.
Now, I think it's more warranted than like some 100 games. But again, still, I think it's like a little iffy whether or not it should be in that top 100. I'm glad I gave it a chance because it's one that I've always seen very highly rated. But it left me wanting a little bit more out of it.
I'm curious about it. Just the description of the card flipping system, it still has me interested, even though I know I would probably ruin it for everyone else, if I'm being honest with myself. I think when I first was getting into this hobby, I used to be like, deck building. Oh, give me everything. You know, I owned like the DC deck building game. I had a version of Ascension. And now I just feel like if I'm playing a deck builder and I don't really know what's good about it, it's going to feel like any other deck builder, more or less, right? There's not a lot that separates these anymore. And then it can just kind of feel like I'm just making decisions arbitrarily, and I don't know, it's not all that interesting. Like Dominion gets a pass because it has strategy guides, and there's kind of like, it's more about the path you choose to follow. And something like Clank, where it adds that extra texture with the sort of push your luck getting in and back out thing. I think those games are interesting because they found a way to like make something fun happen beyond just the deck building. But like deck building as a mechanic in and of itself, it's kind of dull.
I think the market has gone in that direction in general too.
Yeah.
Real quick word on Aeon End's theme. This is very much, we have Brandon Sanderson at home coded, you know. It's just like the Dark Evil Lord Vorthos released rifts to let the monsters into the humans' world. The human clan assembles secret magics from the ancient peoples of Nuvaria to create the power to create rifts. Like, it's just like, you know, and then like, oh, you don't draw from the deck, you draw from the annals of the library. And like, it does two things that I'm not even going to say dislike, that I actively hate in our hobby, which is replace theme with setting. Oh, if we just put a bunch of words and stuff, then it'll evoke the flavor of it, but then the flavor isn't there. And then the other thing is
fantasy soup.
It does just a generic AI generated version of fantasy.
You got to be careful throwing that around because people get offended at the idea that you know, their creativity was reduced to the equivalent of AI slop.
Yeah, but like it is very much an AI slop kind of theme. Like to be clear, I'm not bashing on Brandon Sanderson. I'm bashing on Brandon Sanderson likes. Like there's a lot of this, like, I'm going to create my own unique world that has its own magic properties, but it's not as well thought out and there's not as much world building. And that definitely comes across in Aeon's End.
I know you recently had the chance to play the Mistborn deck building game, new game alert.
Yeah, and as someone who hasn't read all the books and stuff, like I still thought the theme was way more compelling and interesting. Like it felt concise and it felt like mathematical in a certain sense, which I appreciated. It made me understand where these games like Aeon's End or a lot of the Kickstarter campaign games are coming from. Oh, this is what they're modeling after. The limited access I have to Mistborn is just so much more interesting than Aeon's End, for example.
Gotcha. Well, you know, I think it's kind of fair in a sense if you imagine being like the copywriter who gets like the Aeon's End and it's just like, give us the theme. And, you know, I don't know if the designer had like a big vision. I shouldn't say I'm talking on my ass in that sense. Like maybe it's been a lifelong world that they had in their brain and they're just like, I'm going to get it out on paper and it doesn't matter whether people think it's good or not. It's my world.
I don't think it was a phoned in setting. I think it's more of a passion project of the designers kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes in video games, you have this thing where the studio's so big that they're just trying to capitalize on something. So they create a, Black Desert Online kind of generic JRPG setting. But in board gaming, I don't think the studios are big enough to really just be like, this is what will appeal to the largest audiences as far as I think it's still a little personal, which I appreciate. But instead what we get are, I'm really good at creating mechanisms or creating a good game. I'm not as creative when it comes to creating an interesting story or theme, and I don't have access to an existing IP. So I'm going to put together something that's similar to themes that I'm a fan of, but I'm not going to execute it as well because we don't have somebody that's art director, for example. There is no art director. It's just the designer or the developers, and that's it. And I think that's more likely to happen in board gaming right now. It's really hard. I'm not going to be like, if it was me, I would have done a good job.
Right. What you're saying is, if it was me, I would have hired someone. And if I couldn't hire someone, I maybe would just...
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what I would have been able to do. But I'm just saying, I understand why themes like this happen and why they can still be successful, fortunately. Because on the gameplay itself, there's already an interest. I feel like the theme is weak.
That's what you're really trying to say.
They don't have an art director, or at least, I don't know that they do. Or even if they had an art director, they didn't have a creative director that focused on the vision of the world building. It was the same person or people that designed the game. Anyway, that was the captivating world of Aeon's End. Somewhat interesting mechanisms, really uninteresting theme.
Boom. Done. All right, Kenny. I'm going to talk about a little known game that we've actually yapped about before. It's Yokohama Duel. So not just Yokohama, but the 2-player exclusive dueling game from 2018, designed by the same designer as the original, Hisashi Hayashi. Oh, and it's published by, it was GMT, but now it would be whoever...
Ooh, GMT, are you sure?
Sorry, Tasty Minstrel Games.
Tasty Minstrel?
TMG.
Okay, yeah, TMG.
Yeah, TMG, GMT. Yeah, it's not a GMT game, of course. I was joking about this with my girlfriend the other day. I was like, GMT, MTG, MGT.
It's always those three.
Yeah. Now it's under Synapses Games, maybe, in the US, from what I can tell. This is getting a nice little reprint. So if you're interested in the description of this game, you can, I think, still back their Kickstarter or potentially lock into their second printing. Why am I bringing this game up again? Mostly, I was very impressed playing it again, just sort of how compact they made Yokohama and how much it generally still feels like Yokohama. I think the biggest thing that's missing from this is sort of that route building element that you get in the full game. That is not here, and instead there's an interesting sort of tug of war with these power level cards. So you have to take the lowest powered action available to you. So you're incentivized, right, to block your opponent where it makes sense, but you'll get a less powerful output as a result if you just focus on the blocking. So you have to kind of balance things, almost push your luck with what your opponent plans to do. I played this with Taylor, and she is notoriously very adept at these resource puzzle games, and I got my fucking ass handed to me playing this against her, which was kind of upsetting, but I like to think that I was mostly too tired to really pay attention to what was going on at first. That was my biggest downfall. Not that she did a bad job, but she crushed me by just going to the bank, or actually she went to the factory right at the beginning, grabbed a resource that made the bank more powerful, and then went to the bank and basically was just ahead on straight up money for the whole game. And there was little I could do, it felt like, to catch up to her, which I found fascinating. It almost makes me wonder if the game is missing some amount of counterplay if your opponent gets an insane start just because of the way the tech cards line up. I like to imagine that it's there, but it also but with these dual games, it makes me wonder if their focus was just on designing something that would capture the essence of the original, and they weren't necessarily all that concerned with balancing it out so that for this head-to-head format. Because whatever the line might have been to get out of my position, I never found it. And it was a score of 60 to 90 type thing. So But this game's a lot of fun. Like, if you like Yokohama and you haven't played Yokohama Duel, I recommend it. And even if you have not played Yokohama, I think Yokohama Duel is a cool head-to-head experience.
Do you think you prefer Yokohama or Yokohama Duel?
I think I slightly prefer the original game, just because I think the route building part is exciting. It has the same sort of texture as Brass.
Yeah.
Where you have like a twofold puzzle. I know.
It's a good game.
They're both good games, basically. They're both worthy of play, and I just thought I'd shout it out again after having replayed it again. And I didn't know, I think the last time we talked about it, they had not announced a reprint. And then when I looked to log the play, it was like, oh, there's a reprint for this. And it's very much in the style of the second version of Yokohama. So I was a little surprised.
I was pretty surprised too, because I think you even said last time, you were like, I don't think they'll ever reprint this.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, you can apparently check it out. It'll be easier than ever to get in a few months, in theory. I don't know if this is getting blasted in the ass by tariffs, though. So
hey, they might go directly to retail, or it might get pushed out. Yeah.
Yeah.
100 games to play before you die.
All right, Kenny, the 100 games that you need to try before you die, brought to you by Kenny Katayama, none other than our resident knowledge expert of board games. He knows all 100 that you need to try out. Game number 33 is the one we're talking about this week. That's Scrabble, of all things, from 1948. Designed by Alfred Mosher Butts, who was born in 1899. So that's how friggin' old this game is.
You think anyone's ever made fun of his last name?
Probably not. And apparently it's published by Hasbro if you live in the US, but everywhere else in the world it's owned by Mattel, which is weird because I thought they're rivals. So I don't know how that one happened.
Yeah, very strange.
Now that Mattel made the success of the Barbie movie, how long do you think it'll be before we get Scrabble the movie?
I don't know, because Battleship was a flop, right?
Oh my God. I forgot about that.
I don't think it implies that they're going to come out with other stuff.
I think it's required.
Still waiting for that Magic the Gathering movie. I have a script ready to go.
You're joking, but like, let me just tell you, they announced years ago, like a TV series was coming to Netflix.
Yeah, still in the works. Trying to get Andrew Garfield on that one.
Honestly, like, you know how like that League of Legends show came out and it was like everyone, even if they didn't play League of Legends, was watching it?
Yeah.
Like Magic could have that.
Andrew Garfield is Jace the Mind Sculptor. Anya Taylor-Joy is Liliana.
Please tell me that they're voice acting in a cartoon.
Jack Black is a Johnny.
No, Jack Black is Nicol Bolas. Jack Black as Nicol Bolas goes so hard. Can you imagine?
All right, Scrabble, 1948. What is there to say? I'm not going to explain how you play Scrabble. I think the important distinction with Scrabble, it's a word spelling game, not a word association game. I think sometimes those get grouped together as just word games, but I think that's kind of a misnomer. Like, I don't think that Decrypto and like code names are in the same category as Scrabble, because you don't need to like formulate words out of letters in Decrypto. What you do instead of associating words is like you use whatever resources you have to create the most point-worthy word positionally on this board. And the interesting thing is, because of the spots on the board, sometimes the word cat will score you way more than if you use all your letters, for example, as long as you're hitting that triple letter or something like that. The other notable thing about Scrabble is it was the first game to kind of like have an interesting distribution of letters. A lot of spelling games prior to Scrabble just put like maybe 2 of each vowel and then 1 of each consonant.
Right.
It really wasn't thought out. Amabel Holland just did a really interesting video about tracing back the origins of the specific like dice rolling word game, and talks about games like Scrabble within it. I'll put the link in the description.
I do think it's fascinating that, like it took them like until the 50s, even though like games with spelling as a mechanic have existed for a surprisingly long time. But it just kind of goes to show like how much sort of might still kind of even be underexplored today.
Yeah. So why does Scrabble make it on and other classics don't? I think Scrabble holds up. And I also think that Scrabble is probably the best representation of what it's trying to do, which is games where you can assemble letters. There's something very rewarding for some players about like going through the mist of a bunch of letters that are randomly handed to you and coming up with the most optimal word to score points. And you see this time and time again. There are other games like this, Upwards or Quiddler, Bananagrams, even more like I would say contemporary.
Letter Tycoon.
Paperback, that's what I was thinking of. Paperback and Paperback Adventures. Like this is a thing that just has always kind of like fascinated certain players. It's not for everyone. I'm just going to put that out there. I think it's important to represent it on the list because for that one player who really does get like that itch scratched, I think Scrabble is the best way to get into it and be probably one of the more representative games in that category. I enjoy a game of Scrabble from time to time. I know, Tom, you're not as enthused.
No, I'm not nearly as into it. In fact, this is making me think that I feel like I've already spent the credits for this, but I actually was entitled to make fun of your mom's French accent because she insulted my intelligence at our live show.
That's true.
Because I talked about not liking Scrabble. She was like, "Do you know how to spell?" And I was like, "Come on."
You got dissed pretty hard.
Oh yeah, she wrecked me in that moment. But it really isn't like, because I said this with her. Like I feel like I'm a really good speller. No joke, like come at me.
I'm really good speller.
Yeah, I know how to spell words.
I'm really good speller, no good grammar.
No, for real though. And like I'm not just saying that to brag. I've like done online testing and stuff. You know what I mean? Like I hit the marks. All I'm saying is it's not about that. It's more just like it requires sort of a brain burning experience of me. Like it's like revving at top speed the whole time in order to try and find like the most impactful words.
Yeah.
And
I get it.
It ends up being like kind of just exhausting as an experience.
I will acknowledge trivia games for a second. So there is no trivia game on the list, not even like Wits and Wagers. And I think my biases are showing because for me, I was like, even if it's not somebody's jam, they should still try a spelling game. But for me, like, I think people can live without having tried a trivia game. I like in talking about Scrabble, I feel like I'm making rather an arbitrary distinction. So I think trivia was one of those.
Like 100%, because we even have that guy that's like run around all these different Scrabble tournaments across the world and just dominates them because he just straight up memorizes the lists of short words that you can make in that language. He won't speak the language at all. He just knows the shape of the words.
It's just like The Shape of Words, by Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah.
If I'm going to be honest with myself, like you had asked what replaces Quacks, and I said like probably just one of the games that couldn't make it on, not necessarily like an analogous alternative. Maybe Quacks becomes a trivia game if I'm going to be fair. So anyway, that was Scrabble.
Cool. Well, enough of that fucking bullshit, whatever the hell we've been yapping about. Scrabble ass, fucking spelling ass games. Gives a shit ass. I don't know, Texas Hold'em. I don't know what else we've even been talking about. Those are all old games, Kenny. Old, boring. Why do we even run this podcast and all we do is talk about old games? It's time to get into fun stuff like fandom. Have you ever heard of fandom, Kenny? Do you know what fandom means?
No, I don't. What does it mean?
Well, see, fandom comes from what actually is this? It's a portmanteau, right? Like fan, but it's not kingdom.
I don't know.
What's the dom?
Dominated by fans.
Fandom. It's just interesting that it's like a word, and I'm like trying to think of the etymological origin of the word because it's a relatively recent word, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, fun fact, it does come from the same root word as dominion, basically like the English domain. So it's like the dominion of fans, which is perfect because it's a segue into Dominion, which has a fandom.
So let's start with Dominion.
Okay.
There are dedicated folks in Dominion that will explicitly play Dominion nonstop. And those groups are further subdivided into 2 categories. So I'll share this with you, Tom. This is really interesting. Okay. There is the competitive Spike Dominion players that maintain the Dominion wiki, the Dominion strategy wiki. And then there are local groups of Dominion players that literally follow the mantra of like, you're not supposed to play to win. You're supposed to play to explore. And they are like antithetical to each other. They're like the different kingdoms in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Like they like have different approaches fundamentally to this game that we generally just play as just like a game, which I think is really interesting. I don't think there's a right way to do it, but I feel like it, like if I were to put my coin in the bucket or whatever, like I'd say it's somewhere in between. Like, why do you have to like stand in a camp, you know?
What's the point?
I guess the point is like there's not one fandom for games. Maybe we're doing it a disservice if we start to evaluate the games in terms of specific lenses. Gotcha.
It's like, yes, the game has its fans. You shouldn't define its players by its fandom. Kind of like Super Smash Bros. Melee. A lot of people like Melee. And then there's the Melee fandom.
Yeah.
Right? Similar idea? Is that maybe what you're getting at?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe what I'm saying is that the fandom can be good and bad for a game. On one hand, like fandoms can provide really, really deep insights and understandings of things that nobody would have gotten to without the crowdsourcing and without this sheer effort. But on the other hand, they can become a little gatekeepy, or they can start to steer towards certain visions about what is fun or what is interesting about the thing they're fans of. You see this with like TV shows too. There's just a completely different approach from like the fans of Buffy versus somebody watching Buffy, you know? Or even just like the Netrunner Reddit, for example. The Netrunner Reddit is pretty different from StimHack, which is pretty different from somebody just playing Netrunner at their local game store or at their kitchen table. They all have like different approaches, and sometimes they can be a little too hypersensitive to their desires or their intent. I wish there was a way to just homogenize everything.
Yeah, if only we could all become part of the same hive mind.
Exactly.
That would be good for society.
Discard your own thoughts and opinions. Become part of the hive mind. One thing that Cole brought up last week was that when you go on Board Game Geek, it used to be that there was kind of a collective idea of like board gaming because it was small enough. But as the community grew, one nice thing is there's a bigger reach and there's more activity. But like the downside is now there are basically voting blocks in terms of what is considered good. And those blocks don't really overlap as much as we'd like them to. And he gave the example of like, there's the fans of specifically like Gloomhaven, and they're like, there's like the Gloomhaven group. And that's the reason that Gloomhaven is in the top 100. It's not because board gamers as a whole felt like Gloomhaven should be there. It's because there's really diehard Gloomhaven fans, and same goes for Root, same goes for Arc Nova. I don't think it's bad. And I would even argue that there's a lot of goods to be had from that, but it's a lot harder to tell what the consensus is of board gamers as a whole about Gloomhaven, if that makes any sense. Like the top 100 still kind of represents an overall sentiment of board gaming, at least currently, like of like BGG, I should say, not of board gaming, but I can see the argument for like these fan groups are kind of skewing things a little bit.
It's interesting talking about voting blocks on Board Game Geek because it gets brought up. We recently had it's not exactly a March Madness. They called it Geek Madness. And it was like a tournament setting to determine, whatever board game could get the most votes on the forum. And so in that case, it was like literal voting blocks. And it looks like there's an overall shift going on where Twilight Imperium, I think it lost out to Root. Is that right?
Yeah.
I actually didn't see the finale.
Let's look. 2025 Geek Madness Finals. Proposal closed May 19th.
Okay, so Root won. In a tournament setting in which Twilight Imperium, Spirit Island, and Terraforming Mars have dominated the last few years. And I think Root has been around for at least as long as all of those.
Yeah, it's just never won. It's done pretty well, but this is the first time it made it all the way.
Yeah, so congratulations, Root. Congratulations, Cole. Do you think that represents like a shift in Board Game Geek culture broadly, or do you think that like the Root fandom is just growing more rapidly than fandoms for other games?
That's what I'm trying to get at. Like, I feel like the fandom for Root just like decided this was going to be their year. Not even that it necessarily grew, because I remember when Netrunner did that. I remember all the Netrunner communities and forums that we were part of. They were like, hey, we really want to win Geek Madness this year. So everybody go vote or create a BGG account if you don't have one and stuff. That felt weird to me. If I'm not a general consumer of BGG, I probably shouldn't be voting. It's just that at that point, it's just like a popularity contest. And not even a popularity contest where the most popular thing wins, but just the one that had the most campaigning around it.
I was going to say, is that even like a bad thing? It's pretty representative of like real world politicking to a degree. But
that's not the intent is not to have like a real world politicking simulation of board games and how they should win a thing. I don't think that was the intent, or at least that's not the intent I attribute to or interpret from the Geek Madness. For me, the Geek Madness is like the Board Game Geek regulars get together and vote. Do they like this game more or this game more? And that's it. And so all of a sudden you're adding in this weird outside factor. I'd
counter that, like, if your regulars are just getting trounced by Android Netrunner Redditors, like, that kind of just tells me that your regulars are snoozing. You know what I mean? Like, your regulars don't give a fuck. Because that shouldn't be possible if Board Game Geek regulars were just, like, kind of like a big enough force of their own.
Well, no, they are a big force. They are a big force, but let's say it's a close challenge, right? Let's say Netrunner is up against Twilight Imperium, and 60% of regulars prefer Netrunner, 40% prefer Twilight Imperium. Good, it doesn't really matter. But then let's say the Twilight Imperium crowd comes in, all of a sudden TI wins. If the Netrunner crowd comes in, guaranteed Netrunner wins. That, like, it's not like the folks that are straggling on BGG are gonna be able to make back that difference, whereas they could if it was 60-40. So that's my argument. It's like, if you're just counting the regulars, it's like it can be a close match in some of these, but all of a sudden that gets completely lopsided by like outside forces coming in to rally for it.
I don't know. I feel like Netrunner couldn't have made it to the top, like, just on outside rallying alone, if there wasn't already a pretty significant contingent of Board Game Geek regulars, as you're calling them, that genuinely just prefer the game to others.
I agree. I think you can't just make a game that wouldn't win, but you can make close matches change, or even like not even necessarily close, but like smaller margin matches change from the original. You're saying it's like somehow
unfair, or it's just it like violates the spirit of the...
I wouldn't even say that much. It's just my take or my interpretation of what is fun or what we want to get out of these brackets is skewed a little bit by this outside thing. Like, I don't go into it with the idea of that. And so if that's how it was pitched to me at the beginning, I wouldn't care and I wouldn't follow it. And when it's not pitched like that and I come in and that's what happens, I feel a little bit like I wasn't sold on this in the beginning. Like, this isn't what I signed up for.
All right.
I'm not saying you have to agree, and I'm not even saying I'm necessarily right. Like, I'm just trying to like extrapolate the reasons why it feels a little weird to me.
Do you feel like you belong to any fandoms currently?
I would say I belong to the board game fandom as a whole.
Not even the Netrunner fandom, really?
I'm really out of it at this point. I think I definitely at some point was part of the Netrunner fandom, but not anymore.
It's interesting because, like, I guess you have been in, like, fandom in that sense, but I'm trying to think, were you ever, like, in a TV show fandom or anime?
I guess JoJo's.
Yeah, kind of.
I'm definitely, I will rally behind stuff for JoJo's. I think that's the only thing I can think of. Maybe Survivor.
I was just wondering because it was making me think, like, it's fun to sort of, like, get in online wars for shit that doesn't matter.
Oh, I agree.
So, I agree. I'm like, yeah, sure, maybe it goes against the spirit of the thing or whatever to, like, rally the Netrunner players as if they're the Scots and they need to like charge the English of the Board Game Geek regulars.
I think that's more fun in forum discussions or like on Reddit or something. And I think it's more fun if it was specifically, if instead of this bracket, it was like, who has the best fans or who has the best community? And then you voted on the games. But that's not the intent. The Geek Madness is like, which game is better?
Yeah, and the people spoke. They said Root. Root had the fandom that was willing to show up, even if it isn't a better game.
What somehow. I'm saying is, isn't it less interesting to say Root had the fandom that was willing to show up versus Root was considered the best game by BGGers?
The thing is, I don't think you can ever make that latter statement without it being like some sort of like mandatory election done in real life.
Oh no, I'm not trying to claim there should be a way to do it. What I am arguing is that 20 years ago that would have been possible on BGG because the community was lower, like smaller. And I think what Cole was saying was that back in the day, the top 100 was a similar story.
But, and this is kind of like a shit on Cole here, but it's like, wasn't like the Board Game Geek fandom sort of overrepresented in other ways? Like it was overly male, overly tech savvy, overly interested in war games, for example.
It was definitely more weighted toward war games and like OG, like original German games for sure. Combat Commander and Democker.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you're always going to have some kind of thing, but at least everybody that was on BGG agreed with each other. What I'm saying is now they don't agree, but they still all show up in the same spot. Let me flip it. There are still games that exist that everybody would agree are pretty good. Maybe not everyone likes them, but there's a higher consensus. Those games don't show up as often in the 100. So if we're looking at it from the opposite angle, the argument can be made that a Carcassonne would have shown up in the top 100 back in 2005, but a Carcassonne's not going to show up in the top 100 nowadays in 2025. I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's like Board Game Geek. What you're saying is that Board Game Geek is no longer a monoculture.
Yes,
like it
that's what I'm saying.
Sort of used to be, but I don't think it was any better when it was a monoculture.
I don't know. As somebody who identifies more with the monoculture idea in general of just appreciating games, I'm much more willing to. And also, if you're talking about the outcomes, the benefits, right? Somebody going on BGG for the first time, or somebody who's trying to determine what are the games that folks agree are good. Those things are obfuscated nowadays, whereas they were a lot clearer back then.
Yes, but on another sense, like there's more niches for you to end up falling into as a random individual. I feel like you either had to toe the line with like German Euro wargamer bros loving like and I'm saying bros and I'm not using a gender neutral term because it almost definitely was true by men early on. And now, like, stuff like that's not the case. You know, it's like, I guess, like, you have to do more work, in a sense, to find the consensus. But in another way you could look at it is that, like, you don't need the consensus anymore because the niches are better, in a sense. Like, there's more places.
That's a fair point. Yeah, there's these niches.
Everyone.
Actually, you know what's a really good counter-argument to what I'm saying? It's the 100 games list. The 100 games before you die. This is me punching myself in the face right now. But like, I think there's an argument to be made that like a lot of the games on that list that I made, people aren't going to like. The list isn't made so that if you haven't played a lot of games, you play all these, you've played the best things that are out there. The list is made to provide you with these niches that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that one thing that the more recent community has, including myself with this 100 games to die list, is that we've been better able to document these niches and represent aspects of these niches within what we consider the top, versus in the past where you were just given a list of like what, general Board Game Geek fans consider the best things, if they're not bringing in their own objectivity. But that's not helpful to a new player because they're not really getting the breadth of things. They're not going to get that niche aspect, and maybe they're going to miss out on something that they didn't even know existed. So I'm coming around to your argument here. I think the niches are valuable and they're more present nowadays.
There's the other side of it, which I think is more what you're trying to get at, which is that like you could be a person who's new to the hobby, you're entering it somewhat for the first time, and then you're blustered about by the winds of YouTube and Board Game Geek, and you just end up falling into a game group who is playing like dull ass shit that you are not personally that interested in. They're always breaking out like Caylus and Castles of Burgundy or something, and you're like jonesing for something a little bit more like nuanced, a little bit more wild, but you don't know where to get that necessarily somehow, and your game group is not going to end up doing that, except by accident perhaps. But I don't know, that experience sounds a little bit far-fetched even to me, so I don't know how often that's really happening. It's just like I could see that potentially becoming the case where like, just because a group is already sort of like locked in on a particular style of experience, that you're going to sort of miss out on some other side of the grass. But I think like the information is out there for people like to find, like, you'll get there. It's not so obfuscated that it's difficult.
I agree. Can we pivot a bit to a different topic?
Yeah,
I'm really curious on your thoughts about this one. So
okay.
The more a game builds a fan community around it, the more people start to talk about it, not just in terms of appreciation, but in terms of studying, like study.
And strategy, yeah.
I'm thinking of like opening moves in Scythe, for example, or even just Netrunner, right? Like, again, Cole had mentioned this, but like, he really enjoyed playing Netrunner at first, and then the net decking and the competitive scene absolutely killed it for him. Whereas for folks like you and me, like, it added an extra flavor of like, we were still able to like do some silly stuff on the side, but now we had something to work toward. And the competitive community was exciting. It even allowed us to talk with folks online. But then you think of like games like A Few Acres of Snow, or Tapestry. Like A Few Acres of Snow got kind of messed up by the fact that the community identified that there were some like stronger.
There was or more or less a solve.
Yeah, there was a solve. Tapestry got killed by the fact that the starting factions were completely imbalanced. So anytime you got one of the strong ones, you were like, or anytime you got a weak one, you're like, well, that sucks. Same with like Wingspan. Like people were like, oh, there's 4 birds that are better than any other birds in the game. And then that was super awkward. What do you think about that? The aspect of like when a community builds, so does the knowledge of how the game can be won.
Well, I think it's great because it's a self-correcting mechanism in a sense that people that aren't aware of this will probably either they can get the joy of discovering it for themselves, like that particular bird in Wingspan has a 1-to-2 output ratio, like that the other birds just fucking don't. And if you recognize that as a player, incidentally, you're going to be like, wow, I'm a genius. And then if you found out that this was such a common thing that the card is banned in a tournament, it's like, you'd probably just be like, well, that's how it should be in a sense, right? Like if you ended up carrying a lot. And I don't know about A Few Acres of Snow, because that's a kind of a different type of tragedy in a sense, where you can just sort of guaranteed win the game if you know the line.
Yeah,
it's almost like tic-tac-toe.
It's one thing to have a few cards that are broken. It's another thing to have there be only one optimal play style.
Yeah. Technically, I would argue that comes down to a flaw of design or playtesting to have not realized that. And I don't know if this is the case for A Few Acres of Snow, but it's like if there's no mechanism you can pull to mitigate that problem, then it's like, well, it's not necessarily that your design was bad. It probably still achieved what you set out to achieve. It just turns out, I guess, in that whatever war that game was capturing, there was like an obvious line, for one side to take, perhaps. A Few Acres of Stone,
or A Few Acres of Stone. A Few Acres of Snow is interesting in that it was a game that people loved, but that they found a problem with.
Right.
If we look at analogous examples in like video gaming, I think of like Battlefront 2.
Battlefront.
The Battlefront 2, the second, because there was another Battlefront 2, but like people were so mad about that. The loot boxes.
I don't know the story here.
It's like the loot boxes were really predatory, and basically the game ended up costing a lot more than it was touted to be. And there were some other issues from a gameplay perspective that I would say were minor, but really people were pissed with the predatory model. Instead of just people ignoring it like they usually ignore bad games, people like rioted on social media. And the reason why is because they wanted to like the game. They really like Battlefront. And so they were seeing something that had really good potential be ruined by this certain aspect, and they wanted to see change. The problem with Battlefront is like it's not easy to just create a spin-off version or to mod it. Like there's IP considerations, and also it's a lot of work to program things. With board games though, I think fans have a easier access to modify things. So I'm curious, I don't know if somebody did this, but is there a way to like modify A Few Acres of Snow to balance out some of those issues?
I know Twilight Struggle did this kind of. I think like the Americans maybe get like extra influence is kind of a standard setup.
That's interesting.
Because like you can just kind of get rolled in the Middle East by the USSR without those extra bits. So that's what I'm wondering is, I don't know enough about Few Acres of Snow to be able to speak to it. If there is no way to fix it by giving, a handicap over to a player, and there's no way to sort of reconfigure your game so that there's a more even starting point for both players, I think that's where it would become like a real issue. And I'm not entirely sure that that's like the fandom's fault for like discovering that, because I think there's like an inevitability to it no matter what. Whether you call it fandom or not, you're going to get like players enjoying your game if it's successful at all. The only way you could avoid this is having an unsuccessful game, really.
Yeah.
I can see how like, because I remember when Cole mentioned that it killed Netrunner for him, I was like a little bit saddened by that reaction he had, but I understood where he's coming from, because I was talking to Taylor about this recently, I think, and you remember this probably more than I do because you've been in it for longer, but there were periods where Fantasy Flight was releasing 2 possible card designs, and then players could vote on like which one actually ended up becoming part of the game. Players would were proactively banning designs because they imagined the design would be too good. Well,
not even imagine, they tested it.
Right. I think that's where it's kind of stupid. I guess like all I'm just trying to say is like it's an example of a moment where a fandom sort of like castrated themselves before they even got to like really take it into the metagame. It's like they preemptively stopped it from existing. Which, it's a weird thing to put a fandom in the position to be able to make that decision.
I agree with that. I think it's a little weird.
Yeah. But it just leaves a big question of like what could have been, right? And I think that don't do that. Hub World Eidolon, if you're listening, Earthborn Games, don't give us voting power over your card designs. Like design what you guys think is fun. I want to let their editorial perspective inform the metagame, and then the fans can react.
What I'm understanding you saying is like
non-proactively.
Sometimes the fandom can get so like in their own heads or like collectively agree on something that they can make calls that like one would disagree with. And it happens to be that you disagreed with this one.
Yeah, and Magic does this a lot where people get like really worked up over a card before it comes out, and then it comes out and it turns out it wasn't that crazy.
Yeah.
And vice versa. Like obviously it happens in the opposite where people are like, oh my God, this card's going to be busted. It comes out, it is busted.
Yeah.
And it gets banned. I don't know which experience is like better or worse. I just think it's like, I just feel like in general, you shouldn't give fans power over your vision.
I think that's a more interesting conversation. Yeah. So like, I think I agree with you. I don't think that fans necessarily know better than developers. And it's not a yes or no. It's not a pick a camp. But like, if you're asking me at gunpoint, like, would you trust the developers of a game or the fans of the game more? I'm going to pick the developers most of the time. And they'll still make mistakes. But like, I think that fans tend to lean in too much into understandings about how certain things work that are affordances that they established by themselves without like considering either the larger player base, in which case they are correct, but they just aren't seeing the big picture, or where they're simply just misguided. Like straight up, everybody started following a certain quote unquote meta, and they didn't realize that there's another meta. And then 2 years later, something opens up that nobody discovered. This happens quite a bit.
Right. Well, and I think you could convince me even that like fans are better at ascertaining, aspects of a game than the original creators from time to time. And I don't necessarily think
from time to time, but
it's just more like, despite that, I think I'd rather see someone's creative vision and know it was left somewhat uncompromised by its fandom. I love to bring up the fact that I used to be a brony. Like, it's a perfect example of fandom sort of ruining something for everyone else. Like, is a show, it was obviously meant to sell toys and entertain young women, and then the brony fandom, which I understand was like not an exclusively male fandom anyway, but regardless, it definitely created a sort of like a meta of memes. The memes within the community spread so far and so wide that other online communities felt their presence and became resentful. And then on top of all of that, the show itself, because of Twitter and other ways of accessing creators through the internet, became like more and more sort of like pressured to cater to these fans. And then that became a meme of its own. People used to joke about the panda ring in My Little Pony, because it was just like, you couldn't go an episode without seeing like a sort of a wink and a nod to the brony side of the fandom. And as a brony, like, I found it really frustrating when the show started doing that. It felt like it was violating its own artistic merits to be doing things like that. I would have so much rather have watched a show where the creators knew nothing about the existence of bronies. Or if they knew about bronies, it was like a cursory knowledge that there were fans that weren't young women. And then they just are like, okay, besides that, how am I still going to make the best show that I can make? Right?
It's almost like the show got typecast by its own fans to a certain extent and wasn't given the opportunity to go in different directions because there was like a specific angle that it had to take.
Yeah, because it became like a sort of a voting block, like that admittedly had, I think, large amounts of money. And I don't know who exactly, right, like sort of decided to steer creative decisions towards the fans, but it definitely was happening. And then it just took away, I think, like the sort of the magic of a show that wasn't trying to be for these people.
And as we know, friendship is magic, so it took away the friendship in the process.
So maybe it just was a weird evolution to watch unfold.
I think that's a really good example. Yeah. That's a good pull. There's so much more I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about the toxicity that develops when something gets more popular. I think like miniatures games and Magic as an example. I wanted to talk about chess, but those will be...
That's another thing with like a toxic culture online.
Yeah, but that one's also kind of unique. I know we've been pretty negative to fandoms. Like the other thing I wanted to talk about is kind of the benefits too, and we lightly touched on it at the beginning, but like we're out of time, you know?
Well, real quick, right? The good things that fandom can do, right, is be like the hype train. They can spread your ideas, they can recruit new people, like, and right?
Yeah, we've talked about the negative influence they have. They have positive influence too, and there have been moments where they've steered something in a good direction. So like, I don't want to make it sound like any time the fandom gets involved and influences things, that makes it worse too. So
right, yeah, like we don't have Fiona and Cake in Adventure Time, for example, without the fandom.
Yeah.
And I love those episodes.
By the way, they did like a 10 episode spinoff. I finally got around to watching it. It's pretty good. I think it's very much for people who have watched every single episode of Adventure Time.
It's so funny because like I just was having a harder and harder time continuing to watch Adventure Time because it was getting more and more existential. Yeah. Which was just like too emotional for me. Yeah. Ironically. It's not bingeable at that point. It's like BoJack Horseman almost, or you're like, you just feel bad.
Well, yeah, I'll just say Fiona and Cake leans into that even further. So, very much so.
One day, that's going to do it. Thank you, everybody, if you've been listening to this episode. Before you click away, before you turn off your podcast, quick announcement, important announcement. We decided to start a Patreon.
We had a couple folks reach out that were like, is there a way for us to support you? Are you thinking of doing a Patreon? So we finally bit the bullet and we did it.
Yeah, so if you really like the show, it would mean a ton to us, but don't feel obligated at all. We're keeping our day jobs. We're not yet quitting.
Yeah, we're committed to continuing to do the podcast the way we currently do. But yeah, if you want to support us, you can do that.
Your Patreon dollars can kind of get you something too, right?
We started a dedicated Discord, so you can join that Discord and talk with other fans of the cast and talk to us directly. Then there's also the bonus episode content. So we recorded
we have a tier list of all the terraforming Mars-like games.
Engine builder tier list where Tom and I yell at each other for over an hour. So if you want that. And then I have a video essay on how Scythe teaches you the game as you play it. That's coming out soon too. So
that's at patreon.com/shelfstablecast. It'll be in the show notes. Thanks again for listening. We love you so much. Thank you especially to Michael, Tyler, Devon, and Josh of the Boise RainBeaus for your cool segue music. And thanks to Bonehouse for letting us use your song Rot as our opening theme.
If you're loving the cast, share it with a friend or on Reddit or on BGG. If you do, let us know. You can reach us directly at shelfstablecast@gmail.com. All of this and more available in the show notes. Tom pick.
Let's talk about the weirdest, wildest games.
Hell yeah. All right.
That's what I do. Bye.